Whoops. I am on the wrong page. There we go. Still getting the hang of the live streams here. Gonna do a little review video today of the very popular Lex Fridman's interview of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, which was posted Monday, yesterday. And going to try to just roll through some points here. Of course, everybody is going to have comments on this that follows the situation in Eastern Europe at all. But I am going to try to give you my perspective and do it sort of hopefully kind of quickly, but also try to blow up, in my opinion, what the brass tacks points are regarding this interview. And also from the idea or from the perspective that at this point in the game, when we have Donald Trump coming into office very soon, in 2 weeks, and America has a host of issues to deal with, Europe needs to pick up the slack much more, and we have Ukraine basically fighting against this fascist mafia dictatorship in Russia. You kind of have a few different camps involved. So you have people that are generally pro-freedom and pro-Ukraine, as I am, as anybody who has listened to my podcast or watched the show relatively recently understands. And then you have, say, we're talking about American audience here now. So again, it's a question of who Zelenskyy was speaking for in this interview and who he was trying to convince in this interview with Lex Fridman. So let's just say, again, I'm random percentages I do not know, but let's say the middle of the bell curve, 60%, 70% is people that generally support Ukraine's sovereignty, freedom, I think normal views. Then you have the hardcore bread and butter of Lex Fridman's audience, who is skeptical, sort of peace at any cost, maybe peace through capitulation, not peace through strength. And that's fine, it's their views, but it's different than my views. So we have that group that is, I think, going to be a hard nut to crack. A lot of MAGA people in there. It's a hard nut to crack, that group. But certainly Zelenskyy is going to be speaking to them, because we're talking about U.S. support for Ukraine as this year continues on. And then the other side of the bell curve, I think, are people that are, let's say, for Ukraine, but not for it enough. All right, that's sort of middle of the road people. And actually, I know that's confusing the way I describe my bell curve, because I actually think the middle of the road definitely supports Ukraine having their sovereignty and freedom, and they're not peace at all costs people. But I think the other side of that bell curve, like I said, who's not MAGA, who's not sort of hardcore peace at any cost, just stop the fighting for whatever reason. Those people can be persuaded more. That is the other side of the bell curve, sort of people that just don't care, people that have no idea, or people that have never heard of Zelenskyy and kind of have never thought about Russia that much, and they need to be persuaded to understand what this fight is about. So in my view, that's kind of what was going on in this interview. So I just want to take a few points to at least give my thoughts to it. Again, Lex has interviewed some great people throughout his podcast, so he's certainly to be commended with that. But he's come across as having sort of naive views when it comes to bringing Putin and Zelenskyy together. And I'm generally of that opinion as well. But I still want to try to back it up and give broader context to what I see people in the West that should or could support Ukraine, support Georgia, support Eastern Europe more, even though Europe itself needs to do more. I'm always ready to acknowledge that and say that. this is where I think, we just keep pushing the agenda for freedom, not peace at any cost, but for freedom. That's where I'm coming from here. So I want to put this one up just to start it. And so I'm not gonna, show clips. I'm just gonna show you the screenshots and where you want to see them. Okay, so this is about 48 minutes. He's joking about, basically, half joking, of course, that Putin is, not a serious guy if you compare him to someone like Musk, who is talking about putting people on Mars. Okay, and of course, hardcore Ukraine supporters can argue about how serious Musk has been toward Ukraine, but I'm not getting into that. All right. Let's just say this guy Putin is standing there bare ass pontificating about tribes. Okay, that's what he talked about in the Tucker Carlson interview. Okay, so backing up, what is he talking about? What is the context of this? Okay, Putin is engaging in something here. It's called primordialism. Primordialism. Okay, I'm just going to read this here. It's this main quote from Wikipedia. It's not that long of an article because it's mostly a bullshit topic. While implicit primordialist assumptions are common in society and academic research, primordialism is widely rejected by scholars of nationalism and ethnicity, as individuals can have multiple ethnic identities which are changeable and socially constructed. Okay. Without getting too deep into this topic, Putin, during his COVID lockdown isolation, wrote this sort of childish high school type essay where he talked about Ukraine and Russia being one people, even though Russia, the Muscovites, were turning tail, those that did survive the Mongol invasion and those that did go up and found Moscow. These were sort of, the main roots, and they all have this shared vision. They're the exact same people, so on and so forth. People have talked about this ad nauseum, but I just want to make it very, very clear that this is what Putin is trying to do. He's trying to just create some sort of a fiction that the Ukrainian people are basically just identical to Russians. And of course, that's not. We can even simply observe this, that Canadian people who speak English, they also speak French, very different than Americans. Americans, very different among different states, different cities. Brits, very different than Australians, okay? And to sort of use this idea that these are all one people, they should be one country, live together, so on and so forth, it obviously just falls flat on its face. But he is doing that, and he's trying to... Zelenskyy this is one of his better. So the reason I wanted to show this clip here, okay, this is one of the better parts where Zelenskyy is really pushing back on sort of Lex naivete about the simple views that Putin is having for why he started this war. And I think it's an important point to point out, but let's try to take it to another level here. So this is a YouTuber who done very well for himself. It's called Bald and Bankrupt. I used to watch this a couple years ago. It's kind of funny. You see the nice title card there. It's got Soviet edifices, Soviet structures, old Soviet factories. In the last few years, since the war, he's been all around the world. Okay, he's not just been in the former USSR space, but when I was watching him a couple years ago, he's got a Soviet playlist here. He was going to like deep countryside of Russia, deep rural Russia, and just talking to people because he spoke Russian. He's a Brit who speaks Russian, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of an interesting channel, and he's done well for himself. But I just want to show you a picture of here's the lady that he was talking to. She didn't speak English. She said a couple things like big boy, and is very funny and, very jolly person here. This is, very, very far deep in Russia. And some of these people are even speaking different languages than Russian. They do speak Russian, of course. But the point is just he's going to old, underdeveloped, very far away Soviet towns and traveling around Russia because he speaks Russian. Great. He's done well for himself that way. He's got a lot of views in this manner. But I just want to ask you to please, as a Westerner, turn this idea on its head and ask yourself, have you ever seen a YouTube channel of a Russian from Novosibirsk or somewhere in sort of not the center of Moscow? all right, not the center of Russia's cosmopolitan, area, the only cosmopolitan city, of course, besides St. Petersburg, which in itself is a dump because of the Soviet designs. Have you ever seen a YouTuber from Novosibirsk, a faraway area, come to, I don't know, the Rust Belt of America, come to Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, do YouTube videos talking about how life is and how different life is from Russia, or how it's actually even difficult or hard? And look, I have nothing against this lady on the screen or anybody that he's talking in particular with. This guy, this bald guy in his videos. The point is just to turn the idea on its head and ask, how would those types of videos do in America? And this goes into the second point, which he's also talking about here, Zelenskyy, around in this point. I didn't get the exact screenshot, but he's talking about how Russians are mute and they're deaf to the cause of what their country has done to Ukraine, how they are not acknowledging the difficulties, the tragedies, the deaths. They're simply locked into this sort of Russian propaganda mode. You can certainly see how, look, we can talk about propaganda in America or in London all day. It's a fact of life, propaganda. I don't deny it. But you can simply see, if you just look at this area, you look at these, the shoes, the products that they're selling here, they can be very great people, kind people, okay? But if you're talking about these types of people, turn the analogy on its head. Ask who there is going to West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or wherever in the U.S., doesn't matter, okay? But then what types of videos would they actually make? Are they going to go to, even the worst strip malls are going to have better amenities than the amenities that are offered in these stalls of these markets in Russia. And you actually don't have to go that deep. I mean, you can find the exact same image, this image that I'm showing you right here on the screen. You can find this image just on the outskirts of Moscow or St. Petersburg, okay? The economic level of development in Russia is indeed so terrible and so slow and so bad and so backward since the end of the Soviet Union that someone from the UK can come and make a video and speak Russian, and it's interesting. It's interesting for us. What if the same Russian would, again, go to the Midwest, go to South Dakota, go to, some rural center of America? The most interesting thing they're going to show you is like maybe a beaten down strip mall that's maybe going through a bankruptcy, but it's going to be changing hands soon through someone through the capitalist system. And hopefully it's going to be renovated and turned around. There are very few truly ghost towns in that sense in America. Okay, so these are like the starkest of stark differences that we can talk about when we talk about what is Russia versus what is the West. Okay, and so what Zelenskyy is getting about here, where Putin is literally standing there bare-ass pontificating about tribes of Russia, is so primordial. It's so knuckle-dragging. It's so degrading to the people of Ukraine. Degrading. Sorry, my English with my my Latvian and my English sort of mix bad words sometimes. It's so degrading. It's so insulting that no one in Ukraine wants this vision that Putin is putting out to them. This is where Zelenskyy is trying to make this point, and I think he did a good job. I think he probably didn't take it far enough. So that's the first point I want to talk about here, is the idea that he got on this idea a few times. Okay, just talking about how backwards, how mute, how deaf Russians are. But you gotta push that veneer more. And Zelenskyy did a good job. He did a great job. But just so you know what I'm picking up, what I'm reading, this is someone who's familiar with the area. That's what he's getting to, and he could have taken it further. Okay, so yeah, it's interesting to have a YouTube channel where you can go around to rural Russia and have some great experiences, have some great shots with some old grannies by the street who, are just sitting there, and talk to them and learn about their lives and so on and so forth. But that life is not at all the life of what a typical Ukrainian wants, and a Ukrainian certainly doesn't want to be bombed to hell out of these people's leaders who have no idea that it's happening. Further point on the propaganda, okay? I've talked about this a lot. I've never really, I think, given enough play to it. But this book, Putin's Kleptocracy, okay, it was written by a woman, Karen Dawisha, okay, I believe it was an Indian or she has an Indian husband or something with that interesting last name. She is deceased now, but she wrote this book in 2014. Okay, so this book came out actually right when the Maidan was kicking off. Putin's Kleptocracy, Who Owns Russia? It goes through a lot of what Putin did in the 90s. It goes through a lot of the transfer of power between Yeltsin and Putin. It's very good. From A to Z, it's very, very good to give you really the understanding of what has been going on in Russia, but since the beginning, all right? And that is her claim in the book, that since the beginning, Putin knew what he was doing to bring this sort of wave of propaganda to put the wool over the eyes of the Russian people, okay? And just two quick examples there. It's very easy to see if you knew this, but Boris Berezovsky, one oligarch who initially supported Putin, then became one of his fiercest critics, then mysteriously died of suspicious circumstances in London. He had his TV channel stolen by Putin, nationalized by Putin in the year 2000. Then another oligarch, again, there's a lot of oligarchs in Russia in the 90s, a complete product of Soviet Bolshevist communist thought, which is a 100-year-old problem. So if you want to talk about antecedents, if you want to be a Scott Horton type character and just denigrate the people that are getting victimized and cheerlead the people that are doing the victimizing, we can talk about antecedents. The antecedents, the problems of Russia, certainly are Bolshevism, communism, totalitarianism, autocracy. But if you want to talk about the problems, they didn't start in the 90s with Russia, okay? Anyway, there were oligarchs in the 90s, and some of them had private, independent, pushback against the government TV channels. Putin monopolized two of them within the first year. He took Berezovsky's in the year 2000 when he came on the scene unelected, Putin, and he took Gusinski's, it was called NTV. He took that in the year 2001. From the beginning, Putin was monopolizing. It was Fox News on steroids, one channel only from the beginning. You have to understand that. And so if you're living here in this type of an area, all you have is a TV. Again, this is pre-smartphones, even with smartphones now. Zelenskyy, another clip that I didn't show from the interview. Zelenskyy was asking Lex, because Lex says, oh, there's a lot of Russians that can probably see this. This is going to be great, at least. Zelenskyy says, you know that they banned YouTube in Russia. YouTube was the hardest thing for them to ban because Russians did love YouTube. But anyway, pre-YouTube, imagine you're living in a place like this, in rural, deep Russia. Imagine you're just guzzling Russian propaganda daily from the Kremlin because there is only one message. Orwell, 1984. That is what was happening, and Putin started it from the year 2000. He didn't start it 5 years ago. He didn't start it 10 years ago. He started it from the year 2000. Okay, so I really encourage people, if you are slightly interested in this topic, if you watch some of Zelenskyy's interview and it slightly opens your mind to learn more about Russia, about Ukraine, about what is happening over there, and how Ukraine literally, as we say in the Baltics here, they are not fighting just for us, they're fighting instead of us. How serious this is, and how strange it's going to be when Trump comes in. I encourage you to go back and read just this book to start, Putin's Kleptocracy, and you're going to get more of a flavor how he started this from the beginning. The propaganda machine started immediately. Okay, so Putin is not giving something enlightening when he talks to, he does a half-hour diatribe about tribes to Tucker Carlson. This is nothing that is surprising to any of us that have followed Putin remotely over the years. Zelensky's trying to convey this to the Lex Fridman audience, and I'm not sure it completely landed, but he definitely tried to get to that topic, talking about how there's no YouTube in Russia, talking about the propaganda, talking about how Russians are deaf and mute, and now Zelenskyy has no patience for them, no time for them. These are the things that that Fridman himself is oblivious to. He certainly hasn't read this book, or if he has, he was skipping pages, because it's been clear from the beginning. One more modern, very quick example. This is just from October 2014. St. Petersburg bans Holocaust memorial event, citing COVID-19 restrictions. Was this from 2020, 2021, 2022? October 1st, 2024. Okay. These are still on today. In Russia today, right now, there are COVID-19 restrictions on public gatherings. Is it because they're worried about COVID? Of course not. Anybody following my channel as well would know that if you protest with more than a piece of paper in Russia, you will go to jail. If there are two people, or actually for 10 years, from 2014 to 2022, for 8 years, it was two people or more would go to jail. From 2022, no protest at all, no holding even a piece of paper at all. If you gather, if you have this attempt to assemble in the public square, which is this is something that the Romans banned, by the way, which is why the Americans did not ban it. If you attempt to assemble in the public square, jail, 15-year possible sentence, at least. All right. So in case, again, these are things that I really would have loved for the American audience that was, let's go back. We got 3 million views, 3.1 million views at the time here. I would have loved for Zelenskyy to just pull that thread a little bit more on these little points. Everything is banned in Russia. They really are deaf and mute to the cause because they don't hear it. They've never heard it. I'm not defending them, by the way. I'm not necessarily, I don't want to I'm criticizing or defending them, but they don't hear it. They don't hear it. And this was a very important part when he was talking about YouTube being banned, when he's talking about, do you think that the Russians actually hear what is happening in Ukraine? Do you think that they care? You need to understand much, much deeper here if you want to really get to the core of the problem of why Russia is a problem and has always been a problem to Eastern Europeans. Okay, they've always had this autocratic mentality, and that's at some point they need to take another stab at it, but only they can do it. Okay, we can't do it. No one's trying to bomb Moscow. I'll come back to that, by the way. No one's trying to invade Moscow. No one's trying to do regime change. All right, another one. This is at the 104 mark. Talks about a ceasefire. This was good. This was very good. Basically, he talked about some ceasefires. He talked about Mariupol being bombed to smithereens. To absolute rubble. He talked about how Russians never honored ceasefires. I wish he pulled on that thread a little bit more, okay? August 28th. This is 2014. 2014, August 28th. This is the Kiev Post. This was in the east, okay? A town called Ilovaisk. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly in Ukrainian. August 28th, 2014. This is right before the Minsk Accords. I'll be quick with this, not too much in the history here, all right? Late at night, the Kremlin issues a statement from Russian President Vladimir Putin calling on proxy forces to open a humanitarian corridor for the Ukrainian soldiers who are trapped in an encirclement to avoid needless losses. Ukrainian commanders in Nohopila continue negotiating with Russian officers. The soldiers prepare to leave the besieged city the next morning. The Russians attack Ukrainian columns near the village of Chumaki and Chervonosilske, firing at mostly civilian vehicles with grenade launchers and machine guns. All right, now this is not an uncommon occurrence with Russia breaking ceasefires. This, by the way, was the eve of the Minsk agreements when Ukraine was losing a lot of battles. Even though they stopped Russia at Mariupol, 2014, this is 2014, mind. They lost a lot of territory in the Donbass, and the Donbass, kicked off here, right? After that time. It was already kicking off in the spring, but it solidified the line freezing. Here's a Gemini ask about Russia breaking ceasefire agreements. It's actually being quite PC, okay, saying that both sides broke agreements. But again, this goes back to people that say that somehow Russia followed the Minsk treaties. We need to be honest about what happened with Minsk. Both Minsk 1 and 2. Minsk 1 happened right after this event, okay, where they broke a humanitarian corridor. And right after this one, the Baltsev, this was in February of 2015, they broke another ceasefire and fired on a humanitarian corridor. You can read more about it. Just look at the Baltsev evacuation. This happened right there. Okay, this was directly after Minsk 1. Okay, Minsk 2. I'm not going to read all this stuff, but basically the bottom line is the ceasefire never started from the Russians. Zelenskyy does start this. He does start to talk about it. Ceasefires never work. They've never worked with Russia. They don't follow their agreements. So the argument from the Russian side has always been that Ukraine didn't give enough autonomy in Kiev. They didn't give enough autonomy or decentralize the Donbass enough, okay, which everybody can talk about. Everybody has talked about. Ukraine did not do that. Fine. What everyone in the West needs to know, and Zelenskyy, again, I think he was alluding here. He just didn't pull the thread enough. Russia has never followed the ceasefire agreements from 2014. And certainly when the full scale started, there were many more. In Mariupol, there were failed humanitarian corridors. The Christmas ceasefire here. There's just a lot of things that came up where Russia said that they were going to cease fire, and they didn't. Lech Walesa, one of the heroes of the Polish solidarity movement, said that Russia always has one hand holding the pen, another holding a hand grenade. There are reasons that people say these things. It's just these are entrenched, deep reasons. And again, Zelenskyy tried to pull the thread, not as enough. Here's another one. This came at about 1:25 in the video, the Budapest Memorandum. Now, this has been talked about ad nauseum. I know the Budapest Memorandum was not a treaty, was not a binding treaty. Again, Russia and Ukraine had many binding treaties signed about the sovereignty of their land, including the land of Crimea, in the 90s. Okay, the biggest one was in 1997. It's called the Big Treaty. In his book, Provoked, Scott Horton never mentioned the Big Treaty in the context of Russia violating it at all, not once. Most apologists for Russia never talk about how Russia has violated every possible border treaty that Ukraine and Russia had together, which they absolutely did. But even throwing all those things aside, this was actually an interesting point. I would encourage you to go back and read what he says about the Budapest Memorandum. The word assurances versus guarantees, I know it was not a guarantee. It was not a treaty. And looking back as an American, I was young in the 90s, not paying attention to this stuff at all. Zelenskyy as well, by the way. But he's talking about going back, even in 2014, trying to invoke the Budapest Memorandum. And what he talks about is that all that they said is that we're supposed to have meetings. In the UK, in the US, we're just supposed to have meetings. And what I very much liked in this interview is he said, this chapter is not closed. We are not letting go of this. We're not forgetting about it. We're not just tearing this piece of paper up. The Budapest Memorandum meant something. We gave up our nuclear arsenal for you, the West, all right, led by Bill Clinton at the time at the table. For you, Yeltsin, the drunk Yeltsin, the leader of Russia at the time at the table. The UK as well was involved there. So it's a very short text. It's nothing fancy. The Budapest Memorandum. You can read it. Ukraine, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, talking about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a UN treaty. This memorandum, which talks about the sovereignty of Ukraine, the borders of Ukraine. It says it specifically. All right. So someone has violated this. You can talk all you want about who should have done what or who didn't do what. Someone has violated this, and it sure as hell is not Ukraine. And good on Volodymyr Zelenskyy for sticking to this point and for saying, for sure, this chapter is not closed. We will be using this in the future, as they damn well should. So I encourage people to just understand that if words are going to mean anything, and again, Russia always has one hand on that hand grenade and one hand on the pen, but if words and treaties are going to mean anything, or memorandums of understanding, you need to follow them. You need to follow up with them. You need to have some, again, if this is the rule of law, not the rule of only war, then words need to mean something. So I really thought that this was a good point that probably most commentators didn't talk about enough. But he said in this interview, we've not given up on the Budapest Memorandum. And he said, again, to provide more context, in 2014, they tried to invoke it as, look, I was in Maidan. I was in Kiev in February 2014, the first week of the Olympics. I was talking to friends, I was talking to Ukrainians on the ground, people talking about trying to invoke this, and because it was already going on. Sorry, at that point, I guess it wasn't right at that point. Crimea hadn't happened, but right after it, all right, I'm talking to friends, we're talking about it, like it was immediately when Crimea was taken by Russia, the Budapest Memorandum was on the table. It did not just start to be talked about in February of 2022. And this is important because, again, Obama, who knew nothing about foreign policy, all right, and Biden as well, noticed that it's the Democrat administrations where Putin has acted aggressively against. All right, so that does give me hope, by the way, for Trump, because it's the Democrats always that have been weak on foreign policy and protecting America's allies, and just following up with agreements, following through on agreements. Obama did not do enough, okay? That is the point, and I'm very glad that Zelenskyy is mentioned here, that this is going to be an issue. This chapter is not closed, so pay attention to that point. This was a good one, all right? This was probably Zelenskyy at his best, okay? You're just going to read the caption right there. What is he talking about? He's responding very quickly and pointedly to Lex Fridman's idea that you can't just look at him, Putin, that is, as someone who's lost his mind. You have to speak to him like a human being, someone that clearly loves his country. Typical Lex Fridman type speak, which that's got him far. It's fine to speak that way, but there's certainly some naivety involved in this type of speaking. Zelenskyy basically cut him off and said, "Who does he love? Are we talking about Ukraine? Because loving Ukraine has gotten millions of people displaced, tens of thousands of children deported." Who knows how many people murdered, raped, tortured, all right, Bucha, Irpin massacres. These are all issues that Zelenskyy very pointedly and importantly pushed back. I think this was probably the best moment of the interview, in my opinion, and I would encourage you to watch this point. It's about an hour 45, where he goes and talks about, do the Russians love the Chechens? Okay, 1 million Chechens were killed. By the way, Putin started the Chechen second war, the second Chechen war. He was managing it. This is typical Russian style. Just obliterate, just destroy, and then at the end, put your flag on the top of a destroyed building and act like you liberated it. This is the Russian way. So that's what they did in Ukraine. That's what they did in Chechnya. That's what they did in Syria. That's what they did in Georgia. And there is fear, of course, all across Eastern Europe, which I am evoking that fear to you, dear viewer. I appreciate you hanging with me for this non-Bitcoin, non-economic, non-money supply rant on Ukraine, which I'm just going to do. It's going to be part of this channel going forward. Made the decision. It's been harder for family reasons to make as many of these videos before, but now I'm going to try to keep it up. So anyway, in this first response video, it was a very, very poignant piece where, very poignant part of the interview where he's pushing back directly on the naive view of what Putin is, who he loves. And he says he just loves himself, okay? Go back to this book, read this book. You're going to see that he just loves himself, all right? He stole food in the 90s in St. Petersburg, actual truckloads of food. They stole it and they sold it on the black market in St. Petersburg. No one got the food, the humanitarian food that was delivered. Okay, Putin has been doing this from the beginning. He's been dealing with the mafia from the beginning. There are a lot of good authors on this. This, in my opinion, is the best book that's just going to give you the quick and dirty of it if you want to go from 0 to 60. But the point here is very, very strong. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that, again, we're talking about a Western audience who doesn't know anything about Russia. They don't know anything about Putin. Again, there could be, I don't know the percentage breakdowns, the tails, as I was trying to struggle through at the beginning of the interview. I don't know who is just hardcore MAGA, never going to change their mind, and doesn't really have any love lost for Ukraine, sadly. I don't know who is just on the fence versus who is genuinely supporting peace and sovereignty and a strong United States in the world. But, and when I say strong United States, I mean strong United States and its allies, which that is clearly what has been the agenda of the Atlantic agreements from post-World War II. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about this multipolar world, which a lot of people seem to like, fine. But who's going to be our ally here? Who are we going to protect? And who is simply just going to break the rules and go another way? These are things that we need to think about. But breaking down the just simplistic, oversimplistic views that people like Fridman do have. Again, to his credit, he let Zelenskyy go on with very good responses. But I just wanted to provide a little bit more info about these points, because this is, to me, these are the crucial points of the interview. And just to continue on with the idea of Russia loves, because Zelenskyy does a great job. He's talking about 18-year-olds being just lamb to the slaughter, the meat assaults. This is, if you're not familiar with any of this, they call them meat assaults. They haven't changed their tactics literally since the Soviet Union time. It's true. I mean, Patton recognized this. He called the Russian the drunk. I mean, numerous NATO soldiers have talked about how drunk in the 90s the Russian generals were, and even in the 2010s. We've seen it. I mean, we've just seen on the battlefield. They don't have any organization, and thank goodness for that, by the way. Thank goodness. I just want to make this point clear, and I will wrap this up. But the fact that we have this sort of, I can see, all right, if you're an American sitting there in Oklahoma, and you're hearing mixed messages about Russia. On the one hand, you're hearing that they're running out of ammo. They're burning through all their World War II stock. They do meat assaults. They have no values. They're drunk. They're terrible. And yet they're waging, a genocidal war on Ukraine. You hear that. But then on the other hand, you hear something that Zelenskyy mentioned. I don't have it in the menu bar, in the just whatever, the screenshot. Zelenskyy was trying to warn the West about what Ukraine would do if an unjust peace, if a peace through capitulation was agreed. This is another important point of context. And the idea there, I think, can fall a little bit hollow. It can ring a little bit hollow to those that don't know enough, because you're hearing, on the one hand, Russia's a big army that's going to do a lot of bad things. But then on the other hand, you're hearing just how terrible they are at everything. And it's hard to say it, and I think I can actually wrap the video up in a good way here. They can do both things at once. They can be maniacal, corrupt, mafia-like, monopolize their state media, dictatorial, vodka drunks. They can be all of those things, but also have post-Soviet imperial revanchist views. And that's another thing that I think Zelenskyy was alluding to a lot. I heard Vlad Vexler's review, by the way. He's got a great YouTube chat channel. He I think he actually mentioned some point like this, and I agree with him, is that Zelenskyy was alluding to that perhaps a little bit too much. He was saying, he's trying to warn the West, which we all agree with. Look, you don't have to tell anybody twice in the Baltics or in Poland about the dangers of what Russia can do when they just see that there's an opportunity to strike. All right, they will strike. And again, ask yourself why they struck twice during Democrat administrations. All right, both in Maidan in 2014 and after the massive failures of Afghanistan in 2022. Okay. So those are things I think to think about, and why supporting Ukraine is so important, because the other side, honestly, is this. Okay. Here is a picture of. I already forgot. This is Volodar. All right, this is the end of last year. Okay, about the same time that they were suspending Holocaust memorials in Moscow and St. Petersburg because of COVID. They took the key city of Volodar, as they said. Again, not as key as Pokrovsk, as other people know recently, but this is what typically happens. Look, you got, I think this is a Soviet flag, okay? Soviet flags were seen a lot since February 2022, okay? So that tells you something, again, about the Russian spirit, about the Russian soul, about the Russian world, is a Soviet flag of communism and no private property and death and dictatorship. But then you got the Russian flag. Now, if you search hard enough on YouTube or on Twitter or wherever, you're going to find Russian propaganda videos throughout these last 3 years when they've demolished, turned a city to rubble like Mariupol. Russia will make a play of this. They'll show it with pomp and circumstance, and then just a solemn, simple image at the end of a Russian tricolor flag hanging above this rubble. And this is just the best thing that could have ever happened to Russia. I bring you back to. Sorry, I lost my tab a little bit. I wasn't even. I'm gonna have to do that part again. God, this is me. This is me full screening and not paying attention to comments. Here, I'm gonna take you back to the. Let's do a transition. Repeating that part again for the live stream. This was Volodar, all right, in October 2024. Okay, this is a typical scene that you will have when Russia takes a town and has taken a town like Mariupol, just turned it to absolute complete rubble. And they'll make marketing videos of it, all right? They'll show the death, the destruction, the carnage. It's the sickest thing you could possibly imagine. This is sponsored Russian propaganda. And at the end, there's a simple Russian tricolor flag hanging above the buildings that they just completely leveled and destroyed, like a neutron bomb. All right, no people left, no values, no morals left, no soul left, but the Russian tricolor flag is there. This is their aura. And again, you got to ask yourself, who is Putin actually helping here? All right, as Zelenskyy said, he's killing by hugging. He loves his Russian people so much, he's killing them, throwing them at meat assaults. And by the way, I want to, for those libertarians that are listening to this, I know a lot of Bitcoiners obviously are libertarians, but people that are more Western oriented and despised George Bush's Iraq and Afghanistan invasions, I'm with you, by the way, okay? I know there's dispute about Afghanistan directly after 9/11, what could have been done better or worse there. Probably a response would have happened regardless from anybody, any administration. But Iraq, for sure, I'm with you, all right? That unprovoked. And as far as anybody could tell, the intel was not what they said it was, okay, at the UN and other places. I'm with you, all right? I'm with you. That does not take away the fact that Russia can do this literally unprovoked, although you have propaganda books like Scott Horton's Provoked, which are just absurd on so many levels. I've addressed it some places. I'll address it more other places. It's a completely different scenario. Has nothing to do with America. It has everything to do with putting in the garbage bin the world that American values have tried to help build up after World War II. All right. Again, I'm not blindly patriotic to the American war machine here or anything. So if you want to just know a simple brass tacks, what was it what is sort of the view that I take on this war versus prior American wars? I would say we simply should have been like Bush Sr. with Kuwait. Simply should have been like that, and not at all like Putin is acting like. I don't want to. It'd be probably a little bit too treasonous to say Putin is like Bush Jr. with Iraq, but the idea, you can hate what Bush Jr. did, W. Bush did, all you want in Iraq. That's fine with me. But I just hope, I really hope, and I hope that the points have gotten across here in this video, but also obviously for Zelenskyy. I think this was certainly a net positive to reach an audience where people they're tired of unnecessary wars. They're looking at this, for some reason, the aggressor they're looking at fondly, sort of with some sort of, I don't know, it's unbelievable. Again, understanding that if you hate what W. Bush did in Iraq, how could you not loathe and despise what Putin is doing in Afghanistan? And Lex Fridman mentioned it in his video. I think the treasure and the casualties are important to point out. I'm not going to say either one right now in Iraq, but if you want to look at what Russian is doing, at least to their own people, for sure, we know the numbers are pretty high. 800,000 casualties, death, KIA, wounded in action or missing in action. It's huge. Okay, so I wanna wrap it up now by looking at this map. Okay, this is again from October, so it's increased a little bit, the war map. But the two biggest, again, this is something that I think could have been, the string could have been pulled on a little bit more in the interview, probably was not. The two biggest reasons that I saw in the past 3 years from those in the West saying that we shouldn't go all out supporting Ukraine, as any of us in Eastern Europe would have done, said we should have done, if we could have done, so on and so forth. Like we Baltics, Poland, Czech Republic, so on and so forth, we were all in on helping Ukraine there, and still in many ways are, in every way, I'd say, in the Baltics at least. There's two things. The first argument about stopping the war at any cost, not having a just peace, but for peace with by capitulation of Ukraine, that's fine. There's two arguments. Okay, the first argument is, why should we let Ukraine fight until they're all extinct? Okay. Now, after 3 years, look at this map and tell me. I'm going to talk about the deaths, okay? But look at this map and tell me, does it look like Ukraine is going to become extinct? And if you know anything about Ukraine or the people or the resolve or how they have even changed more in their fierce opposition to Russia in the last 3 years, does it look like they're going extinct? They have been fighting with one hand behind their back the entire war. Whereas, if we had done the Bush Sr. Kuwait way of a full-on assault, air, ground, I think even from sea, from the Gulf, if I recall correctly, full-on assault of kicking the army, the aggressor, out of the space that did not belong to them, that's a just war. That's a just cause. And I just hope that some people who watched the Zelenskyy interview could have their minds tweaked just a little bit, that this could have been done here. Russia could have been kicked the heck out of Ukraine in 2 weeks. All right? That's the bottom line, actually, of the dithering, this, the Sullivan sort of pros and cons, weighing the options. We're helping Ukraine, but we didn't. Or we're secretly helping Ukraine. All these things. If you just said it loudly and proudly and from the beginning, the aggressor should stay the hell out of Ukraine's sovereign borders. Firstly, it's possible the war was avoided altogether, which Zelenskyy touched upon. That was a failure. But secondly, we could have used force. We could have actually used lethal force to push them the F out of Ukraine. We could have done that. And if you now tally up the total cost for 3 years, has it been worth it to do the drip drab, slow support? So in hindsight, I hope that people are thinking now, as we are actually talking about peace, but if people really want to understand what Ukraine wants, and by the way, the polls that do say they're going weary of the war also say that they're not willing to give up territory for peace, so keep that in mind. But if you think about what Ukraine needs and what Ukraine wants, as a united West, we could have helped them so much more than we did. And I hope that during this Republican administration, again, just speaking as an American as well and as someone in Europe, I hope that they can indeed find a just peace. The second point, which I always hear about not helping Ukraine too much, all right, just enough, but not enough, of course. So the first point again was, we just need to end the war, or Ukraine will go extinct. Obviously, Ukrainian Zelenskyy they're absolute heroes. The people of Ukraine and Zelenskyy, for what they've done, for the war that they've waged, the defensive war that they've waged, and the offensive even into the Kursk region. But it should be clear. I mean, just with your own eyes, simply thinking about the territory that was taken pre-2022 and then post-2022 and then even post-March of 2022 when they were kicked out of Kiev, they're not even close to becoming extinct, but they're super tired. They haven't been helped enough. And if we are a world of treaties and borders and rules and sovereignty, then I think that decision to drip drab them really could have been thought again. All right, and hopefully people take that into context as we move into 2025. And then the second thing, of course, is the nuke, is the threat of nukes. And I don't really know, other than to just say it, and I'm not going to give even an explanation. But if you think that Putin would have, I don't know, launched nukes on Washington, if Russians were simply pushed out of Ukraine, we're not talking about invading Moscow. We're not talking about invading that shithole. We're not talking about invading St. Petersburg. We're not talking about dropping bombs on Novosibirsk. We're talking about pushing Russians out of Ukraine. The nuclear threat will always be a threat from Russia. There's a lot more courage that is needed here. But and especially from a libertarian argument, just one more point. If someone's just going to claim nukes, then we don't even have private property anymore. There is no property to defend. Because if someone's going to invade a country and then claim nukes, and then libertarians are going to sort of get scared and say, we don't want World War III, this and that. We don't want to go with Russia, this war to Russia, this and that. Nobody is talking about that. Nobody is talking about invading Moscow. People are talking about defending Ukraine. And the Ukrainians want to do it themselves. They just needed the weapons. And we probably didn't have nearly enough help. And I think Zelenskyy made good points as well on that. So that's all I have for this little Ukraine diatribe, Zelenskyy Fridman review video. Let me know if you like that. And thanks for watching.